so doggone fine. I just can't get you out of my mind. You become a sweet taste in my mouth now, and I want you to be my spouse so that we can live happily now, in a great big old roomy house. And I know you're gonna groove me, baby. Oh yeah, now make me feel good inside. Come on and groove me, baby. I need you to groove me. Oh yeah, now, darling. Come on, come on. Hey there, sugar dumplings. Come on, give me something, girl. I've been needing for days. Yes, some good loving with plenty hugging. Ooh, you cute little thing, you. Girl, between you and me now, we don't need no company. No other man, no other girl can enter into our world. Not as long as you prove me, baby. Oh, come on, make me feel good inside. Come on and groove me, baby. Move me, baby. Oh, sock it to me, mama. Oh, I like it like that, baby. Groove me, baby. Hey, groove me, darling. Come on, come on. I need you to sock it to me, mama. Come on, and now groove me, baby. Hey, good God, it make me feel so good inside. Now, come on. Come on and groove me, baby. Groove me, baby. Oh, sock it to me, stock it to me, rock it to me. Come on, come on, come on and groove me, mama.
It doesn't matter if you love him or capital H-I-M. Just put your paws up, 'cause you were born this way, baby. My mama told me when I was young, we're all born superstars. She rolled my hair, put my lipstick on, in a glass of her boudoir. There's nothing wrong with loving who you are, she said, 'cause he made you perfect, babe. So hold your head up, girl, and you'll go far. Listen to me when I say I'm beautiful in my way, 'cause I make no mistakes. I'm on the right track, baby, I was born this way. Don't hurt yourself and regret, just love yourself instead. I'm on the right track, baby, I was born this way. There ain't no other way, baby, I was born this way. Baby, I was born this way. There ain't no other way, baby, I was born this way. Right track, baby, I was born this way. Don't be a drag, just be a queen. Don't be a drag, just be a queen. Don't be a drag, just be a queen. Give yourself prudence and love your friends. Subway kid, rejoice your truth. In the religion of the insecure, I must be myself, respect my youth. A different law is not a sin. Believe capital H-I-M. Hey, I love my life, I love this record, and me, I'm on it, bro, like my guys. I'm beautiful in my way, 'cause I make no mistakes. I'm on the right track, baby, I was
Don't be a drag, just be a queen. Whether you're broke or evergreen, you're black, white, beige, chola descent, you're Lebanese, you're Orient. Whether life's disabilities left you outcast but leader teased, rejoice and love yourself today, cause baby, you were born this way. No matter gay, straight or bi, lesbian, transgender life, I'm on the right track, baby, I was born to survive. No matter black, white or beige, chola or Orient me, I'm on the right track, baby, I was born to be brave. I'm beautiful in my way, 'cause God makes no mistakes. I'm on the right track, baby, I was born this way. Don't judge yourself and regret, just love yourself and yourself. I'm on the right track, baby, I was born this way, yeah. Ooh, there ain't no other way, baby, I was born this way. Baby, I was born this way, born this way. There ain't no other way, baby, I was born now on the right track, baby, I was born this way. I was born this way, hey, I was born this way, hey, I'm on the right track, baby, I was born this way, hey, I was born this way, hey, I was born this way, hey, I'm on the right track, baby, I was born this way, hey. Same DNA, but born this way. Same DNA, but born this way. Our day will come, and we'll have everything. We'll share the joy. Falling in love can bring. No one can tell me that I'm too young to know. I love you so, and you love me. Our day will come if we just wait a while. No tears for us. Think love and wear a smile. Our dreams have magic because we'll always stay in love this way. Our day will come. Our dreams have magic because we'll always stay in love this way. Our day will come. Our day will behind a rainy day, I'm in a snake bag situation. Here's a pencil pad,
get a purple stain called a king is in tune. Beside the whistle cat, screaming me our word. Along a frosty roadside, always in time. I get another ring, making me happy. That'll take me for another ride up in the sky. Whoa, heaven you see her bright. She knows you making me happy. Now I'm snappy while I'm with you. Got to be heavy, 'cause I am happy when I'm with you. Inside a dream storm, dreaming out of style. Upon an 8 o'clock sit down, dreaming for the other half, so I can move on down.
Thank you all for joining us at Student Veterans of America's 13th Annual National Conference, or as we call it, NatCon. And to those of you tuning in from around the world, we are so glad you could join us today to hear about such an incredibly important topic, one that impacts all of our chapters. So much so that later in this session, we'll be joined by First Lady of the United States, Dr. Jill Biden. I'm Dr. Abby Kinch, Vice President of Programs and Services at Student Veterans of America. 2020 affected just about every aspect of my life. Yesterday, we talked about the pandemic's influence on how we live, work, study, and connect with one another. And today, we'll reflect on another change brought about by the events of last year. When George Floyd's murder was broadcast around the world, many people were forced to face the reality that our country does not work for all Americans. Discussions like this take openness and vulnerability that many people find uncomfortable. We are about to dive into just such a conversation. We will hear personal stories, lived experiences, and we will learn together about the importance of open and honest conversations. I'd like to start by introducing two incredible people who I consider shining examples of what SVA chapter presidents are. Please join me in welcoming Erica Lee of the University of Maryland Global Campus and Cameron Zibikowski of Grand Valley State University. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Really appreciate it.
Absolutely. I want to dive right in and ask you, Erica, if you would mind sharing your experience on May 25th, the day that George Floyd was killed, and into that summer. You know, we were 2 months into lockdown. You were trying to stay safe from COVID and go to school, and then you had this experience. Can you share a little bit about that with us?
Absolutely. For me personally, immediately following the death of George Floyd, I really felt saddened, disappointed, and just really upset that something like this has continued to happen in our nation and that it's gone unaddressed for so long. And especially that something like this can happen in a pandemic, in the middle of a pandemic. And it's been highlighted on such a large scale, time after time after time. It really left me feeling hopeless and that there's no chance for change.
Right, right. Cameron, Same question. What was your perspective?
Yeah. So for me, it was very heart-wrenching and heartbreaking to see that in the 21st century, we're still having this issue that we've had for centuries, and it hasn't gotten any better. I mean, to an extent, but things need to change and conversations need to happen. And until we have those conversations, those fierce conversations, and we recognize where the problem is and how we fix it, until we have those conversations, change won't happen.
Right.
One of the things I did as a chapter leader for our chapter at Grand Valley State University, immediately following the tragic death of George Floyd, I sent an email out to all of our membership at our university, condemning the actions and making it very clear where our chapter stood on inclusivity, and that non-inclusivity, we had a zero tolerance policy for that in our chapter. And I think that's also very important, is taking that stand and doing what you know is right.
How did your chapter react to that kind of messaging?
Yeah, so it, for the most part, was very well received. We following the email going out, we went, and several of the chapter leaders and chapter members went and participated in the peaceful protests in the city of Grand Rapids. It's important to, I think, especially coming from a historically white university like Grand Valley State University is, I think it's very important that we be out there showing our support and not just talking the talk, but walking the walk also. It's extremely important to demonstrate that.
Right. Now, so Erica, I know that your chapter wasn't huge, wasn't active at that time last year. Who did you lean on, or who did you turn to sort of try to cope?
So, although we didn't have an active chapter, and unfortunately, I did not have the allyship or other student organizations at my university to turn to cope or to express my grievances or hurt. I was fortunate enough to be able to turn to my friends and my family who also feel the pain and were able to show me sympathy and empathy towards this as well, because it's something that directly affects them as members of the Black community. So I fortunately had them. If I had an established chapter, much like one at Grand Valley, who is at a predominantly white university, who thought to even take a stand and use their voices as white members to kind of lift our grievances and our hurt and our pain and bring attention to that and bring it to the forefront and really, really establish a healthy allyship with their chapter, I would have been wildly appreciative of that. And I hope that now that I'm serving as the chapter president, that is something that I can give back to my chapter as well as my university.
That's incredibly moving and important. So I mean, how do you see your position now changing since those experiences, and both of you really, now that you're leading a chapter into 2021, how do you both feel about that?
Erica, did you want to go first, or do you want?
Now having this chapter finally established, up and running, I am hoping that I can, along with like my other board members, establish a great space, a safe space for us to talk, for us to discuss our differences, even with our other student veterans who, even if we don't agree, we want to create a space where we can understand each other and understand how we can go forward making a change, and how our white members could even serve as allies. Because I think that it takes a lot, much like Cameron has already done with his chapter and at his university, which is a predominantly white institution. They have really helped as allies elevate our voices. And I hope that's something that I can create at my university and in my chapter. And I want to really commend Cameron for being an ally and helping elevate his chapter's voices of minority groups, especially people of color. So I commend you for that.
Thank you so much.
That's really awesome. You know, these conversations are important and are going to keep happening. Right now, I'd love to introduce Vice President of Culture, Diversity, and Engagement at Prudential Financial, Ms. Ronnie Charkala.
Hello, student veterans, employer partners, supporters, and other guests. My name is Ronnie Charkala, and I am so privileged to join you today briefly as you begin your National Conference for Student Veterans. Let me begin by thanking you first for your service, not just your past service to our country, but for your continued service in your communities, your workplace, your institutions, and your overall leadership. Let me begin with a brief introduction. I've been working for Prudential for almost 3 decades. And when I hear that out loud, it sounds so scary and it's gone by very, very quickly. But I'm currently responsible for culture, diversity, and engagement. But what does that even mean? I've been trusted with creating and managing programs to keep employees engaged in their work and through each other through a common company purpose. My team manages and creates employee programs that focus on volunteerism, community engagement, team building, as well as employee resource groups, all with an aim to create a diverse and inclusive workplace culture. I certainly didn't expect that I would spend the majority of my career with just one firm. I actually didn't even know what I wanted to do for a living, as I suspect most of us don't. I just started and thought I'd figure it out along the way. But I want to talk about the theme for this year's conference, leading forward together. Nothing could be more fitting in this moment. The conference really speaks to inclusion, the importance of allyship, embracing our diversity in all of its forms, role modeling inclusive leadership, and more. Inclusion and diversity is not only important in the workplace, but in our lives, and how inclusion is the job of everyone. Deloitte Consultant talks about signature traits that are found in inclusive leaders when we speak about this work, and I want to touch on just 3. Curiosity, courage, and collaboration. Stay curious and keep an open mind. Learn from others and their differences and lean into the discomfort of learning something new. Courage. Have courage to role model inclusion by taking a risk to share something about yourself and then creating places and spaces for others to do the same. And collaboration, because everything is made better by doing things together, where you can build off of each other's strengths, both figuratively and literally. But I know those words and those traits are not new to this group. Your training, skills, and experiences that you have already amassed make you role models for valuable leaders in the skills and attributes that are necessary requirements for us to lead in the future. I also want to talk about the importance of intersectionality. And in this context, it refers to all of the diverse attributes that we carry and how they intersect to represent our authentic selves. Everyone has more than one identity. It's how you want the world to see you. And again, this group is richly intersectional. In addition to being veterans, you're community leaders. You are allies, parents, sons, daughters. You represent various races and ethnicities, genders, orientations, and abilities, and they are all additive. You are the sum of all those identities. It is so important that you bring those identities and allow others to do the same. Remember that state of inclusion is a journey. It's a journey that everyone's on, and journey implies forward movement, so it's not a destination. Everyone is in different places along their own journey, and we reserve the right to continue learning and growing, and sometimes even making mistakes. Post-academia, look for a workplace, a profession, a calling that mirrors your values so that you can bring your best self to work. Find a peer network just like the one you have now so that you can continue being supported in a positive community. Companies also have those positive communities, and they're sometimes called employee resource groups or business resource groups. Please ask about them along the way. I want to end with optimism for your future as you continue on your own journey, investing in your future selves as leaders. Each and every skill is something that you will carry forward, and no one can ever take that away. Thank you again for your service. Congratulations on everything that you have achieved so far, and good luck on your journey ahead. Enjoy the conference.
It is interesting to think about all the identities that make up me, and how some of those identities may overlap with people who don't talk, look, or act like me. Speaking of me, I'm Kenneth Mack, president of the SVA chapter at Augusta Technical College. I'm honored to be here introducing our next speaker as part of this important session, Ms. Alana Odoms. Ms. Odoms is a civil rights leader and the first Black woman to lead the ACLU in its 65-year history. Ms. Odoms is also a graduate of the Presidential Leadership Program, a prestigious partnership between the George H.W. Bush, Bill Clinton, Lyndon Johnson, and George Bush Presidential Centers. I know we are in for an inspirational lesson. Please help me welcome Ms. Alana Odoms.
In a glass of her boudoir. There's nothing wrong with loving who you are, she said, 'cause he made you perfect, babe. So hold your head up, girl, and you'll go far. Listen to me when I say I'm beautiful in my way, 'cause I make no mistakes. I'm on the right track, baby, I was born this way. Don't hurt yourself and regret, just love yourself instead. I'm on the right track, baby, I was born this way. Oh, there ain't no other way, baby, I was born this way. Baby, I was born this way. Just be a queen. Don't be a drag, just be a queen. Don't be a drag, just be a queen. Give yourself prudence and love your friends. Subway kid, rejoice your truth. In the religion of the insecure, I must be myself, respect my youth. A different law is not a sin. Believe capital H-I-M. I love my life, I love this record, and me, I'm on it from late by eyes. I'm beautiful in my way, 'cause I make no mistakes. I'm on the right track, baby, I was born this way. Don't hurt yourself and regret, just love yourself instead. I'm on the right track, baby, I was born this way. Oh, there ain't no other way, baby, I was born this way. Baby, I was born this way. Born this way, there ain't no other way, baby, I was born. I'm on the right track, baby, I was born this way.
Don't be a drag, just be a queen. Whether you're broke or evergreen, you're black, white, beige, chola descent, you're Lebanese, you're Orient. Whether life's disabilities left you outcast but leader teased, rejoice and love yourself today, 'cause baby, you were born this
No
way.
matter gay, straight or bi, lesbian, transgender life, I'm on the right track, baby, I was born to survive. No matter black, white or beige, chola or Orient made, I'm on the right track, baby, I was born to be brave. I'm beautiful in my way, 'cause God makes no
Good morning. I am honored to be invited to join you at the 13th annual SVA NatCon. I want to personally extend my gratitude to CEO and National President, my dear friend Jared Lyons, for this invitation. I also wish to extend a warm welcome to all of the chapter leaders and student veterans across the nation. I'll begin my remarks with another deep acknowledgement of gratitude. I want to thank each and every student veteran for your military service and for your ongoing commitment to the defense and protection of our country. We salute you and we honor your sacrifice, your families, and hold sacred the memories of all of our fallen service members. I am honored to be speaking with you during Black History Month, a hard-fought American tradition conceived of by the Black historian and author Carter G. Woodson, one of the first scholars to study the African diaspora, including African American history. Woodson said, "Those who have no record of what their forebears have accomplished lose the inspiration which comes from teaching of biography and history." In my work at the ACLU of Louisiana, and in my decade-long career as a civil rights attorney, I've studied Louisiana history with an eye toward understanding the intersections between race and law, recognizing Louisiana's centrality to the birth of racial segregation in this country. You may know the famous legal phrase, separate but equal, but you may not know those words came from a landmark 1896 United States Supreme Court case called Plessy versus Ferguson, which upheld the constitutionality of racial segregation in public facilities in Louisiana. I am proudly the first African-American woman to hold the title of Executive Director of the ACLU of Louisiana in our organization's 65-year history. The ACLU of Louisiana was founded in 1956 during the Civil Rights era and began with a group of Black and white New Orleanians, many of whom were lawyers, meeting together to develop a legal and community-based organizing strategy to fight segregation and miscegenation laws. To honor this history, my team at the ACLU of Louisiana are committed to dismantling white supremacy and structural racism in the state of Louisiana and in the American South. We do this by challenging the systems of mass incarceration and immigrant detention. We fight voter suppression and educate voters on their fundamental rights to the ballot. We combat police violence against people of color. We uplift the rights of trans and LGBTQIA+ peoples, as well as reproductive rights for women. We also seek to do the hard work of redressing and repairing the harms of slavery by supporting descendant communities and igniting the consciousness of Louisianians by telling untold stories of oppression and resistance. Scholars and researchers hearken to three great inflection points in American history. The first, the Civil War and the 12 years of Reconstruction that followed. Second, the Civil Rights Movement of 1960s. And third, the largest and the most racially diverse social movement in American history, the Black Lives Matter movement of 2020. What makes each of these historical timeframes significant? And what do they share in common? A deep reckoning with racial injustice. And what can we learn from each of these time periods? The vast majority of African Americans who lived on the land we now know as the United States between the years of 1619 and 1865 knew only the terror and torture of being the literal equivalent of human property. They survived in this condition of human bondage for 246 years of chattel slavery. That's the equivalent of 12 generations of African American people who were enslaved. Between 1877 and 1950, there were at least 4,400 documented racial terror lynchings of Black people in the United States. And Jim Crow segregation, which means codified legal segregation in our schools, buses, restaurants, neighborhoods, and public accommodations, persisted until the 1960s, when the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965 were passed. The historian and scholar Richard Rothstein, in his book, The Color of Law, reminds us that until the last quarter of the 20th century, racially explicit policies of federal, state, and local governments defined where whites and African Americans should live. Today, racial segregation in the North, in the South, and Midwest is not the unintended consequence of individual choices, but of unhidden public policy that explicitly segregated every metropolitan area in the United States. In fact, the discriminatory policies of our US government prescribed Federal Housing Association loans and even the GI Bill, which excluded Black families and even Black veterans from accessing home loans and educational opportunities. There are three key principles in my mind to increasing the racial equity quotient in this country, and they are patriotism, proximity, and progress. And I believe that our student veterans possess these principles in spades and can lead us forward in this important work. The first is patriotism. The veteran community possesses a profound understanding of the heights and depth of patriotism. For you, it is not performative. It is deeply personal and fundamental. You know what it means to lay down your life for a cause that you believe in. And in my view, patriotism has defined and been defined too narrowly in this country. We must conceive of those who struggled for freedom, citizenship, the right to vote, and to be treated fairly under the law as among the most patriotic citizens in our country. And we must also honor their sacrifices and redress them. Embracing new ideas about patriotism and welcoming Black Americans into this coveted circle of honor will lay the groundwork for shifting our distorted beliefs about the deserving and the undeserving, the valued and the devalued, the favored and the disfavored. The second is proximity. Brian Stevenson, a civil rights lawyer and a personal hero of mine, says that before we can solve a problem, we must first get proximate to it. We must first get close. You, as members of our armed forces, have been proximate to pain, loss of life, trauma, and to those who've experienced those same hardships. You've defended the seat of our government. You've been dispatched to save lives during catastrophic and natural disasters. And in the face of these challenges, you've displayed unbelievable courage. You have forged relationships on the battlefield and off with folks of different races and ethnicities, people who worship and love differently. We need you to model that radical courage, to bring your lived experience to the table, to deepen our humanity, to sharpen our focus on empathy, and to remind us that we can do hard things. And finally, progress. When you have privilege, you have power. And we all have privilege. And now is the time to use it. Not being racist is not enough. Now is the time to be anti-racist. Now is the time to develop what Dr. Barbara Love calls a liberatory consciousness, wherein we move from awareness to action and from action to allyship. What must we do to actually actualize allyship? We must study history. We must read. We must listen. We must donate, march, vote, call in, speak out, step up, and lean in. How you use your power is a choice. Choose reflection over rebuttal. Choose courage over comfort. Choose to inhabit a brave space rather than a space of safety. Choose progress over perfection. In a time of racial reckoning, millions of Americans are tired of consuming a zero-sum game and deeply want to co-author a new American story, one that depicts our shared future with safe and high-performing schools, infrastructure, fair wages, quality healthcare, and education. We can do this together as a nation, and I believe that our veteran community stands at the forefront of this challenge. I welcome each and every one of us to co-author a new American history together. Thank you.
Alana, thank you so very much. Ladies and gentlemen, we have something powerful here with Alana. Radical courage. Each of us possess that. Thank you, Alana.
Thank you,
Alana
Jared.
and I now have something special to do. Dr. Jill Biden is a mother, a grandmother, a lifelong educator, and a proud military mom. As the First Lady of the United States, Dr. Biden works to bring attention to the sacrifices made by military families to highlight the importance of community colleges to America's future, and to raise awareness around the particular importance of women, including breast cancer prevention, all while continuing to teach at a community college in Northern Virginia.
As a military mom, Dr. Biden understands firsthand how difficult it can be to have a loved one deployed overseas. Dr. Biden's children's book, Don't Forget, God Bless Our Troops, was released in June 2012. Inspired by real-life events, the book tells the story of a military family's experience with deployment through the eyes of Dr. Biden's granddaughter, Natalie, during the year her father is deployed to Iraq. The book also includes resources about what readers can do to support military service members and their families. Dr. Biden has also been an educator for more than 3 decades. Prior to moving to Washington, D.C., she taught English at a community college in Delaware, at a public high school, and at a psychiatric hospital for adolescents. Dr. Biden earned her doctorate in education from the University of Delaware in 2007, January. Her dissertation focused on maximizing student retention in colleges and community colleges. She also has 2 master's degrees, both of which she earned while working and raising a family, something that student volunteers and student veterans everywhere can relate to.
Dr. Biden's experience as a military mom and a higher education professional make her an absolutely important leader to our community. We at Student Veterans of America are privileged to work alongside Dr. Biden in joining forces, and we are incredibly honored and humbled to welcome Dr. Biden to her second NatCon. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my distinct privilege and honor to introduce to you the First Lady of the United States, Dr. Jill Biden, who will be joining us for the 13th annual SVA NatCon in just a moment. Thanks so much for being here with us today, Dr. Biden.
Thank you, Jared, and thank you for your leadership of SVA. And it's wonderful to see you again. As some of you may know, the Bidens are a military family. Our son, Bo, served for a year in Iraq as a member of the Army National Guard. And my dad was a Navy signalman in World War II. Recently, I had the chance to go back to Hamilton, New Jersey, to see the memorial that bears my father's name in his hometown park. It's a modest stone obelisk with names of the local men who fought in World War II etched in bronze. And I'll never forget how on some Sunday afternoons, my dad would take my sisters and me down to polish those names. It was a small thing that he could do, a communion with his brothers in arms, a way of honoring the bond that they had with each other and the sacrifice that they had made. You know, my dad is gone now, but as I ran my fingers over his weathered name, I thought about his legacy, how he and the men he fought beside made our world a safer, more just place, and how his service not only changed his life, but mine as well. My dad was from a working class family, the grandson of Italian immigrants and the son of a man who delivered furniture for a living. And thanks to the GI Bill, he was able to go to business school in Philadelphia. He eventually became a bank manager while my mother stayed at home to raise 5 daughters. We had a warm, loving home in Willow Grove, Pennsylvania, a suburb of Philadelphia. I grew up cheering for the Phillies and riding my bike long after the streetlights came on. And when I decided to go to college, my father made it clear that he expected nothing less. That was my family's American dream, a life where military service meant educational opportunities, where the proud daughter of a veteran could pursue her own dreams because her dad paved the way forward. Ever since my dad's time in service, our nation has made a promise to the courageous souls who take up arms for us that your service will earn you the chance to pursue your education. As a teacher myself, I've taught many veterans transitioning from military service, worried that, they might not adjust to civilian life, only to find confidence and purpose in the classes they take. I've seen them not only adjust, but thrive and become leaders in their communities. And that's what we see in SVA's award nominees today. Like Erica Lee, a first-generation college student who in this difficult year and while pursuing 2 degrees, took on the challenge of reinvigorating her school's SVA chapter. Or Ann Stalcup, who immigrated to this country from Mexico and joined the Army as a way to give back to the country that has given her so much. As she finishes her doctorate in counseling psychology, she wants to use her skills to help older veterans. Or Hudson Miller, who joined the Marine Corps after a tumultuous first semester at college. Through his service and deployments, he grew as a person, and he started to take classes to bring up his GPA. Today, he's a member of Harvard's class of 2023. And though he never imagined a student like him could succeed at Harvard, he since realized that not only can he succeed, he's showing other veterans that they can as well. In fact, SVA, its chapters and members, all of you have been a force for change across our country. You are the voice of a generation who has carried the incredible weight of our wars for over 20 years. You speak up for each other. You get things done. And you show your brothers and sisters in arms what's possible. The reason we have the Forever GI Bill is because of your persistence and work. The President and I have always believed that our nation has a sacred obligation to equip our troops when we send them into harm's way and to care for them and their families, both while they serve and when they come home. And we know that when you have the chance to succeed, you lift up those around you as well, whether that's your fellow student veterans, your families, or your communities. Education, great job opportunities, the chance to put your experience and talents to use. We owe you nothing less. And that's what the Biden administration is committed to. We're going to implement the Forever GI Bill with precision and care so that you receive the benefits that you've earned on time. We're going to learn from your work and develop best practices for supporting veterans in higher education. We're going to protect the post 9/11 GI benefits for veterans and their families. And let me add that we understand that your families serve and sacrifice alongside you. Michelle Obama and I launched the Joining Forces Initiative, almost 10 years ago, a national effort to support military families, service members, veterans, and their families and caregivers and survivors. and I'm excited to build on the work that we did together. The president and I see your service. We're in this with you, and we will never stop working to make our nation worthy of your sacrifice. This community is powerful, and you've learned so much from your time in the armed forces and everything since. You faced down obstacles and emerged with a brighter future for you, for your families, and for every life you change. But as you know better than anyone, there are so many of your fellow veterans who are still looking for the path that you have found. So though you already have given so much this year, your community needs you to do one more thing. Tell your story. Tell us about the road you've taken through the darkness and the light. Tell us about the roadblocks and the hurdles you faced so that we can make the way a little bit easier and share what this journey has meant, all the joys and the triumphs that you found along the way, so that all veterans know what is possible. Thank you for the legacy you've created, for the lives you've changed. Thank you for your selfless service to this country. And most of all, thank you for your leadership. Thank you. God bless you.
When I was young, we're all born superstars. She rolled my hair, put my lipstick on, in a glass of her boudoir. There's nothing wrong with loving who you are, she said, 'cause he made you perfect, babe. So hold your head up, girl, and you'll go far. Listen to me when I say, I'm beautiful in my way, 'cause I make no mistakes. I'm on the right track, baby, I was born this way. Don't hurt yourself and regret, just love yourself instead. I'm on the right track, baby, I was born this way. Born this way, there ain't no other way. Baby, I was born this way. Baby, I was born this way. Born this way, there ain't no other way. Baby, I was born this way.
Wow. Thank you so much, Dr. Biden, and to the President of the United States as well, for elevating the importance of veterans and our families in this so very important conversation for our chapters as allies. I can't thank you enough for joining us today. It's now my pleasure to bring up to this main stage and Stall Cup a very good friend and a doctoral student veteran at Our Lady of the Lakes University in Texas.
The ability to call those with different experiences into a conversation about your community or culture is important. When we talk about veteran inclusivity on campus, it's easy to call out those who did not serve. But it is incredibly important to bring them into conversations about the veterans who share their classroom. Thank you for that message. I am Ann Stalkup, Vice President of Communication and Marketing for the SVA chapter at Our Lady of the Lake University. Up next, we'll join some of our good friends from Fordham University and the University of Hawaii, Manoa, as well as some former chapter leaders from the New York Institute of Technology and the University of Pittsburgh in a discussion about how organizations, especially chapters, can serve as allies when our communities need that support. Leading this discussion is Timothy Jones, founder of Colorful Voices, an organization providing training to support survivors of sexual assault. Timothy is also a former chapter leader from the University of West Florida. This is going to be a powerful conversation.
together. We invite you to join us in this conversation. Hashtag NatCon 2021 on Twitter. Please join us, as this is just the beginning of a very important conversation. I am joined by an incredible panel of guests that we've assembled for you today. It is my honor to introduce first Dr. Christine Kimwell.
Good morning. Thank you, Timothy, and thank you to Jared, Abby, and the rest of the SVA team for having the courage and leadership to engage in these critical conversations right now. I'm Dr. Christine Kimwell. I use she, her, hers pronouns. I'm coming to you this morning from the U.S. occupied Kingdom of Hawaii, the ancestral homeland of Kanaka Maoli or Kanaka Oiwi, or as you might know them, Native Hawaiians. I have the privilege of serving as the Assistant Vice Chancellor for Diversity and Director of Student Equity, Excellence, and Diversity at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. I'm Filipina and Japanese American. I'm a first-generation college student, and I'm military connected. Like Dr. Biden, I'm a proud daughter of a military veteran. My dad joined the US Navy in the Philippines, and like a lot of Filipino men from his generation, that's how he became a US citizen. He was a Vietnam veteran and retired from the Navy after 20 years of service. On my mom's side of the family, my Japanese American great uncles served in the 442nd and 100th Battalions during World War II. So before I pass it off, I have to give shouts to James Solano, the director of the Office of Veteran Student Services on our campus, and Nick Therian, our SVA chapter president, and all the other student vets from Hawaii.
Thank you, Dr. Kimwell, for joining us. Next, we have Mr. Rafael Zapata.
Thank you, Timothy. It's wonderful to be here with everyone today on this wonderful panel, important panel. And it's a privilege to be with everyone today here at SVA 2021. My name is Rafael Zapata. Greetings from New York City. I am Associate Vice President for Academic Affairs and Chief Diversity Officer at Fordham University, our flagship in the Bronx with campuses in Manhattan and Westchester. I'm certainly military connected. My sister, Evelise, formerly Evelise Zapata, Evelise Gilbert, served 20 years in the Navy after turning 19, and she's gained so much through that affiliation. Her education and the social mobility it's provided her and her family have been outstanding. My brother-in-law, David Gilbert, also is a veteran of the Navy, serving 20 years, and my nephew, Angel Gilbert, served as a medic, a Navy medic in Afghanistan. I'm deeply proud of those connections, and they give me immense pride. And I rarely have a venue to talk about that aspect of my family. I myself am Puerto Rican, Boricua, New Yorican, born and raised in the city of New York. And I'm also a first-generation college student. And the work we do at Fordham, and that's so closely intertwined with SVA, is seeking to allow our students to be their best selves, to draw on shared values, to draw on the opportunity that our institutions provide to allow them to flourish. Part of our conversations will be, when our institutions are at their best, this can certainly happen, and how can we work together to make those things more consistent and a reality for all members of our community. Thank you. Oh, one final shout out. I also have to give some love to my brother Matthew Butler, who's the director of our military and veterans services, Stephen Hellman, our intrepid assistant director, as well as to Emma Cassidy, who's our student president of SVA and nominated for Student of the Year. And finally, previous president, Matias Ayala, who served admirably during COVID, such a difficult time, and supporting the needs of veterans, he and his the leadership of our local SVA. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rafael. Next, we have Miss Ashley Dent.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ashley Dent. I am a proud U.S. Air Force veteran. I am so happy to be here. Thank you so much to Timothy. I'm so happy to SVA for allowing me to have this opportunity. And I am so happy to dive into this very important conversation that we will be having this afternoon, or this morning rather. I currently serve as a COVID compliance officer at Warner Media, as well as being a grad student at the New School here in New York. So thank you very much for this opportunity, and I look forward to diving in.
Thank you, Ashley. And finally joining us, certainly not least, Mrs. Annette Nance.
Thank you all for having me. You know the saying, they save the best for last. So, but I'm gonna make sure that I mind my time. I am a Haitian American and also a master's level social worker. I continue to do a lot of work within my community that has really fostered the community engagement piece with my organization, Saving Others Under Love. And a lot of the things that we're going to talk about today are really going to be things that we need to address and to enforce action. And a lot of the work also continues with my educational background because I am going for my PhD in community engagement at Point Park University. In my wonderful day job, I'm a project manager at the University of Pittsburgh in the Office of Child Development. And I just love what I do and how we get to incorporate what we're going to talk about today in children's lives and how that learning continues to grow. And, you know, I have to give a little bit of shout out to my family, my husband, my in-laws, and also our church community who we continue to do work, Sons of God Ministry, and the other folks in the community. You know, I can't give everyone's names, but I'm thankful for how you have incorporated a lot of the things that I do and that I continue to lead with love and lead with my faith. And to my Haitians, sak passe, nou la, and I want to pass it back to Timothy.
Thank you all so much for joining us for this conversation. As we talked about, we're diving headfirst into a very difficult, tough conversation. And the theme of this year's NatCon is leading forward together. But as we lead forward, we have to acknowledge some very hurtful, some very dark places that we have. And so we're going to start right on in there. I remember as a young kid, I'm from Graceville, Florida, and at 6 years old being told about our hanging tree. It actually was called the lynching tree. And it was a tree that was still there from the young man whom was lynched years ago. And there's photos taking place as far as little selfies, just as trophies of this. This is the type of symbolism that we're really needing to address and go in deep dive about our past and our history. So I want to toss this up to our panel. First question. We know with the tragic deaths of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor that we have really gotten an opportunity to shine a light on these very difficult conversations, but we are in the community. This is not new for us. So we would like to, let's start with kind of revisiting a little bit of our past and how we got to where we are. And I'm going to start with you, Dr. Kimwell.
So my past probably goes a lot further back than most of the other panelists here with me. But for me, it started when I was in college. When I was on a college campus, I was a student activist, really a strong part of our Asian American student organization. And we had an ethnic student center because I went to a predominantly white institution. And so there were so few of us that we did a lot of coalition building and allyship between, back then it was the BSA, the Native American Student Union, MECHA, that I was part of OPSU, the Asian Pacific Student Union, and really working in those coalitions. And I feel like those were the values and kind of the partnerships that I've tried to bring to all of my work as I became a professional working on college campuses and really trying to help students to see the value of these allyships and partnerships and relationships.
And who would like to add to the conversation?
So I can go next. I think for me, I would say it goes back to seeing the things that my mom would do in the community. She came from Haiti to get a better life here in America. And so I saw in the Haitian community, they would band together and really try to do a lot of great things. What does it look like for us to do better and be better here in this country? And that really just motivated me to look at seeing people, you know, who weren't from this country and seeing the language barriers and how I was always able to help my mother, you know, translate different things and things like that, but also just be her ally in learning what it looks like, you know, at such a young age. And so I think that is what started a lot of my community engagement and being to where I am now.
Ashley, would you like to chime in?
Yes, I was going to say that I think for me, what started it is really serving in the military. Having served during my time, there were a lot of opportunities in which there were times where we needed to come together, and you realize how much allyship meant and how important it was. And so I think going from there and going into, transitioning into college and getting active in the veteran space, I realized the importance of allyship and understanding that we all need each other and we all have to have these conversations. And sometimes it's uncomfortable, but we have to have them because that's the only way that we can make it better and are able to peel back those layers.
And I'll jump in and say that this, when witnessing George Floyd's murder in broad daylight, close to 10 minutes, just brought me back to Eric Garner, who was murdered by a police officer in an illegal chokehold that was banned, was supposed to be banned. And that happened in the summer of 2014. It took me back further to 1994 to Anthony Baez, who was also killed in the use of a chokehold after a football that they were playing with hit a cop car and led to an altercation that resulted in his death. There's so many other names that we can bring up. And growing up in New York City in the 1980s, I was a teenager in the 1980s in the middle of the crack epidemic, in the middle of the AIDS epidemic that were destroying our communities, but simultaneously the policies that later became mass incarceration just started to swallow people up. Those legacies are still with us. I was walking to work one day this summer to our Manhattan campus, and I came across someone I grew up with who had just come out of prison after 23 years, after the Rockefeller 3 strikes and you're out law. And what humbles me is that could have been a lot of us. I grew up with a lot of people who are now police officers. I grew up with a lot of people who are now in the prison system or who've experienced the prison system, and there's not that much difference between us. And a lot of friends who use the military and college, like I was fortunate to do, to find a space to understand oneself, to build their leadership, to learn about who we might become. But the pain of watching this man lose his life unnecessarily just took me back to those memories. And simultaneously, the struggles that people have engaged in, including myself, to push back against police violence, to push back against structural violence and institutional racism. The work I did with the National Congress for Puerto Rican Rights, the Justice Committee, and acknowledging the work of so many organizations in New York, nationally and internationally around these issues.
Thank you all. The topic that we're discussing is chapters as allies. Over the last year, there has been an increased amount of attention paid to social, racial injustice, systemic racism, and there are a lot of conversations that are taking place on college campuses across the country, throughout the world. We're specifically interested in how do you begin to have these conversations? How does one, in their chapter, in their community, start this conversation of systemic racism and how to actually really be an ally to your community, to your...
I think it honestly starts with opening up Pandora's box, as you will, and actually having those conversations, and being real and authentic and not caring what the person thinks, just talk about how you feel. And, when it comes to allyship, talk about what can I do to support you? What can I do so that we can to be an ally and to show my support? Especially when you talk about, chapters on campus, those are such close-knit groups that it's so important. A lot of times, in those chapters, you spend a lot of time with those men and women, right? And you become a family. So being able to have those tough conversations is so, so important because it allows you not only to feel comfortable when things like, not even feel comfortable. It allows you to feel comfortable about having those conversations and being able to say, this really, I'm hurting from this. I am tired. It allows you to be able to come to your brothers and sisters of those chapters and just have those tough conversations and know that they are there for you and they are there to support you and they are there to help make a difference.
Yeah, that I agree wholeheartedly with what you just said. And you also have to think for myself how I also view it is it's not just conversation, right? It's also action. Like just because you read this book or you listen to this podcast, what are you going to do after? How are you going to implement what you've read, what you've seen, and you actually take it to the community or your chapter to really implement these things. And we also have to understand what the responsibility that we each have. It is not just for me as a Haitian American woman. It is not for anyone else as this, as that, as anything else, but to come together and get our understandings on the same page, or even seeing what each other understands, and then going from there. Because when we just ingest all these books, what happens? We just sit still and then we start to feel heavy. But we also need to dig deep and see what the actual history of whatever it is that's going on, and address these things, because racism is in a lot of things. White supremacy and all of these things are happening. But in the military, we have not talked about it because we have put a band-aid or we have swept it under the rug. And as we've seen in this country with different organizations, corporations, sweeping under the rug is no longer working. We have to initiate these conversations and make sure that they are meaningful, because if they're not meaningful, we have all these other things that will come to, kind of poke holes into what you just said. This isn't true, or this isn't happening. So you really have to make sure what you say is very actionable.
I think both of you make really great points about needing to have these conversations, to take action. And I think an important reminder to folks is that it also goes both ways, that being an ally doesn't just mean I'm going to have the conversation and Ashley and Annette, can you please tell me everything that you know about your Black experience? And, can you please tell me about whatever? Or it's not my responsibility to be the only one talking about anti-Asian violence in the community, right? It has to go both ways, where we're not just taking, because as Ashley said, we got to be real, we got to be vulnerable, and people are exhausted. And, it's exhausting to feel the weight of the responsibility of representing your whole community, when folks need to be taking their own action to educate themselves about our histories. Raphael talked about the histories in our smaller conversations before this ever happened. We know that, yes, these things have been happening. A lot of us aren't surprised, though, because this has been happening in our communities for a very, very long time. There just weren't cell phones back then. We didn't have recordings, and it wasn't, shot out to the world. And so, yes, we're shocked, we're hurt, we're angered, but we also are way too familiar with the pain and the violence that's been happening.
Those are excellent points. And I think everyone's exhausted because the trauma is relived, but we're also in the middle of the pandemic. We've been socially disconnected for almost a year. And I know I've had my moments even lately in which, you're having interpersonal conversations or you're doing your work, but it feels a little bit different, but it's easy to miss. And trying to carry that grace is really hard. And forgiving others, forgiving ourselves when we're imperfect or maybe not at our best, but it's been really difficult, certainly over the course of this pandemic. Some of the points that were made, that the work being actionable, but that also should be responsible action as part of our conversation previously. And I think you take, what doctors first do no harm. I think at the same time, how do you learn? And if you're taking your first steps toward learning more, take your first steps. Don't expect everything to happen. And also expect to make mistakes. Mistakes happen, but see that as a part of learning. Some way, somehow, we do have to come together and engage one another. And that vulnerability that Timothy talked about has to be present. The vulnerability of hearing people's experiences that have no clue about your own. The vulnerability that comes that Christine and I talked about the anti-Blackness in Latinx communities and Asian communities, right? So not to make it seem like those issues don't exist, and also not to paint the military as the only institution that is struggling with this. But as January 6th made clear, right? There were police officers among the ranks, there were regular people, there were military, but again, it wasn't just that. It's not to highlight these institutions, but anyone could have participated in that. And I think that is a bit shocking, but at the same time, not that surprising. And I hope that spurs us to have the kinds of conversations that can affirm our humanity and kind of the possibility of mutual learning rather than further kind of increasing those gaps. And as I believe Annette said, kind of just trying to shoot down my argument. That's really not the point. The point should be about understanding. And I'll make one last point, is that the military is uniquely situated for this, because I can't think of any other organization that brings together people who would never encounter each other. And even more than colleges and universities, but the military looks more like this country than most institutions. And I think there's great possibility in that.
Raphael, that is a great point and then a wonderful segue into what we wanted to get into. Over the last year, so many conversations have had. There have been friends made on Facebook. There have been friends lost on Facebook. There's this cancel culture. Everyone has gotten into these silos. What do you say to the world in those chapters that are in different silos? They do think differently, but they may not. They're so tethered to one end of the spectrum or the other. What can they do? What can we do to help bridge that gap to come together when you have someone so far divided on values and ideals?
I think that's when we have to start having those conversations and look at it as a learning opportunity. You know, like you can show someone who may be far left or far right or what have you, your perspective, and by engaging in those conversations and allowing them to see, as Raphael mentioned, you know, the military is a prime example. We're such a diverse group of people, of men and women who probably would have never interacted with each other had they not been in the military. A lot of people I went to basic training with, they had never had a Black friend, you know? And so that's crazy to think about, but we have people from so many different backgrounds. So allowing those conversations to be a learning curve and be able to share those experiences, and let's have an intimate conversation. You share your perspective, I share my perspective, and then we can grow from that, I think is what's key.
Yeah, that's definitely true. Because when we start to think about what does it look like for that everything, I think especially in the university context, it's a little, I don't want to say it's easier, but you know, there are a lot of different student groups, right? Collaboration. When you start to collab, when you start to go to the Asian American group or, you know, a Black student union, whichever, see what those organizations are doing, learn about the history of those organizations and really take it in, and then start to have events together, start to get to know each other. Especially in this virtual space, you have no excuse. You can have a virtual happy hour, a virtual game night, virtual anything. You can get on Zoom, Facebook, whichever, but stop making the excuses and move in the responsible action, like Raphael told us to, responsible action, and getting with those internal groups in your university because they are there. The activities, the events are there. So really going that way. And then outside, like once you graduate, you have the same responsibility to do the same thing. If that's a different nonprofit that you're interested in, look in serving on those boards that are fighting social justice, that are in the neighborhoods that you may not know about. Try to learn about the community surrounding you, something that's maybe 5-10 minutes down the road. But in the end, have the initiative to be intentional when you go to these groups, because you can't just go to the groups and just sit there and be like, well, I think I'm supposed to be here. I'm just going to sit here in the background. When you continue to be in the background, you are a part of the problem because you see these things happen in front of you, and that's when things grow. So we have to really understand what these things are, the microaggressions and things like that. And also the third thing, and then I'll be done, is checking your family members, because you have to have these questions, these conversations with your family. If every person, even outside your family and your friends, looks like you, you're wrong. Because you already know you'll never get a different perspective and you'll never continue to learn, because every single person looks like me. I'm not learning anything. I'm not growing in any type of way. So ensuring that you're diversifying your friends and not just intentionally just saying, you know, I want to have an Asian friend, I want to have a Black friend, but looking at what are the interests. Do you like sports? Do you like, you know, whatever all the other things are? There are people who like different things. And that's when you get to peel this onion back and start to see what the things are. So being intentional with it is like my biggest thing, whether it's your friends, your family, or in your universities. Being intentional, and not just, you know, being intentional now in the month of February because it's Black History Month, but then we're going to be in November thinking about Thanksgiving or whichever, and then you forget about everything we just did this year and last. So be intentional and be consistent.
And I think building off of what Annette just talked about and being intentional with this relationship building, yes, don't just call on the Black Student Union during Black History Month or Asian Americans during Asian American History Month. The same way that I know student vets don't want to only be for Veterans Day, and right? So we want to really build these relationships. And like she said, you know, we're in this virtual environment, virtual communities, where we really can get to know each other better. And because, as one of our other speakers talked about earlier, we have all of these different identities. We are Black, we are veterans, we are LGBTQ, we are parents, we are all of these different identities. And so siloing us into these kind of individual ways to think about our partnerships, our relationships, our allyships, is actually kind of harmful because you're not looking at us as a whole person. And that kind of led into the other difficult conversations that we've been having over the past couple of days, where, you know, it's really important, I think, that we simultaneously celebrate and critique what's happening, whether it's with our families, our communities, our campuses. You know, we can and should do both. We can walk and chew gum at the same time. We can celebrate the ways that, you know, we've supported Indigenous land struggles, that we've come out for Black Lives Matter movement. But we also need to be reflective on the ways that maybe we're complicit in the continued oppression of Indigenous communities. Look at things like anti-Blackness in the Asian American community. I mean, it's really important that we also look inwards and know that we're not perfect. And how do we have these hard conversations? Whether it's with our communities or with our families, we really need to. Raphael?
That's so wonderful. Everybody's contributions, you're making me think so much. But what I do want to remind folks, we also have to think about caring for ourselves. Self-care is a revolutionary act. I'm reminded of the words of Audre Lorde and others, that our existence itself can be revolutionary, that we are still here and that we are still thriving. We have to do that. So in order to be present, we need to care for ourselves. In seeking support, I think Annette's point about breaking out of the silos is important. Certainly, I want to make clear for the veterans on our campus that I am here for you. I want to support you. I want to be more present. So please come find me if I haven't found you. And yeah, I just want to be very clear about that. We are here to help and foster those connections to those other student organizations, those other caring faculty and staff and community people that may be harder for you to find. We're here to do that for you, in addition to Matthew and Stephen. And then something that was said by someone earlier, the woman from Prudential. She talked about courage, collaboration, and there was another piece, there was another C, courage, collaboration. But I think those are really important. Curiosity, right? We don't know everything. Be curious, don't assume you know everything. So that curiosity, collaboration, and all those things really, really matter. And it does also take courage.
Thank you, Raphael. You know, my journey through SVA has been so magical and transformative. It has been a beautiful thing to witness, but for me, it's transformed my life. It's really allowed me to connect with so many varying degrees of perspectives and beautiful veterans here. And we've been able to have difficult conversations when it comes to identity. And that goes into my work with Veterans Leadership Program in Pittsburgh. We're so diverse. And over the last year, even in that environment, we're able to have a conversation about where we are in a pulse. And it's been beautiful to see us do there. I'm curious to what you're doing in your communities, on your campus, that we want to leave the group with some nuggets. We talked about basic hope and healing, and now we are starting to transition into action. What nuggets can you leave our attendees that they can be able to serve their communities or their workplaces?
I think just what Annette said, being intentional. Be intentional with your actions, be intentional with your conversations, be intentional with everything that you do, and be don't be afraid to have those conversations and to actually put action behind those conversations. And like Christine mentioned about, don't just look at it as a moment in time, like this is February, so it's Black History Month, but what about, next month when we have Women's History Month and so forth down the line? We have to be intentional with our actions and make sure that, there's action behind it. So be intentional.
Yes, continuing to be intentional. I'm going to say that every single time. You do need a reminder. Be intentional. It's something basic, but being intentional with your actions and continue to learn, because every single day in life we are learning something. Is it if it's from yourself, your family members, but really seeing what you've learned, examine it, making goals, writing these things down. And if you need more help, you can find me on social media and we can talk these things out, whether it be Instagram, on LinkedIn. I am there because we need to continue these conversations with the people you've seen on these panels. It's not that you watch this panel one time and you go back and you don't do anything. Let's continue these conversations because the folks on this panel are open to it. So ensure that you find us because we want to continue these conversations.
And I think one of the things we've been talking about over the past couple of days is how this is just the beginning. And, again, we are so thankful to Jared and SVA for even being courageous enough to start this conversation. So it's just the start. Know that it takes time. It takes time to be intentional, to build these relationships. One of the other speakers talked about having radical courage and moving toward a shared future. And I really think we all need to do that. But I know it can feel scary, especially if you're the only one on your campus, or sometimes you can feel like you're the only one. And this is just the reminder to you as kind of the administrator on campus that we have lots of resources for you on campus, in your campus community, in your broader general community. Maybe you can't find it on your campus, but guarantee there's someone who can help you link up to find some other partners and collaborators and allies in the community. You're not in this alone. And if nothing else, you're part of this SVA community, this SVA family. We are all here. The reason we're doing this is because we want to help and we want to serve and we want to do what we can to build this better future together. And so I think all of us are here as resources for any of you who need more support on your campuses.
And I'll just close with just echoing what Christine said. We are here to serve. Also, leverage the leadership experience you've gained through your service. You know what it takes, but you also know no one does it alone. We have your back. We care deeply about you, but we also want to continue. Want you to be successful in your studies. If there are things you need to get you to finish, care for yourself. Put on your own mask first before you help others, and that way you continue to have the impact throughout your career. Thanks so much.
Thank you. We have reached the time. The time has just flown by. I want to thank each and every one of our panelists. I was reminded, we had a conversation earlier today, and I was reminded that it's taken me 20 years to get to you from an experience that happened to me back in 1999 that was 20 minutes. So we do, this is going to take time. This is only the beginning of a very beautiful conversation that we can really have together. We're going to deep dive into it. We ask you to really reach out to us. We are here. This is one SVA family. We are one community, and we will continue this conversation because that's what we do. I want to thank each and every one of you for joining us. We invite you to continue the conversation. Please use hashtag NatCon 2021. Please, thank you so much, everyone. Any final thoughts before we wrap?
It's my privilege to be here with you today.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, SVA. Thank you, all attendees. We will see you again at SVA Honors Gala this evening.
That went so quick.
Hi, I'm Abby Kinch, SVA's Vice President of Programs and Services. The past year has demonstrated the incredible resilience of SVA chapters and our community overall in the face of adversity. I want to especially thank all of our chapter leaders for going the extra mile to grow your chapters, increase engagement, and continue to inspire tomorrow's leaders. As Jared mentioned yesterday, we're we're going to announce the formal launch of the SVA Diversity and Inclusion Council and a Racial Justice Task Force later this year. If you're interested in learning more about the council, you can email us at dei@studentveterans.org. Now, continue to enjoy all that NatCon 2021 has to offer, and I'll see you back here on the main stage at 4:45 p.m. Eastern Time for the SVA Honors Gala.